Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're getting into something absolutely wild. We're exploring how the human mind processes terror and how it completely blurs the lines between dreams, hallucinations, and reality. We've got some truly unbelievable case studies lined up that show just how fragile our perception of the world really is. Okay, let's dive right in by starting with a pretty terrifying question about the very reality we perceive every day. What actually happens when the world you see, the people you love, and the entire life you've built are just an illusion created by your own neurons? Case study number 1, the mind's fabrications. Let's examine exactly how deeply the mind can invent a reality, looking at a college student named Mitch from Louisiana. Picture this timeline, because it's incredibly bizarre. Mitch meets Kayla in 2004. They get married, they have a daughter, and then a son. He's living this perfect life with a successful career and family dinners. A full decade of deeply ingrained memories. But then, one day, he notices this red lamp in the corner of his living room, and it just looks blurry. Over the next few days, it turns upside down, gets bigger, and eventually consumes the entire room. He hears a scream, feels this blinding pain in his head, and boom, his eyes snap open. He's lying on the sidewalk at his college campus. A police officer is standing there telling him he was just punched in the head by a football player and knocked out cold. You guys, that entire 10-year span, his wife, his kids, his career, all of it happened in the span of a few minutes while he was unconscious on the concrete. He literally had to go to therapy to mourn a family that never even existed. So Mitch's story is all about the brain inventing a world from scratch. But what happens when those mental inventions start bleeding over into the real world and actually start involving other people? That brings us to case study 2, premonitions and shared paralysis. Now, we start with a really strange premonition. Back in 2006, a woman named Sarah repeatedly dreamed of a total stranger named Aurora. Years later, a silent phone call from an Aurora actually paused Sarah's car just in time to save her from a fatal accident up ahead. But as fascinating as that premonition is, the shared hallucinations of a guy named Nathan and his sister take this whole concept to a completely different level of terror. This is where it gets genuinely creepy. What's terrifying here is how Nathan and his sister independently experienced the exact same details of sleep paralysis in the exact same room. Neither of them had ever experienced sleep paralysis before in their lives. But just 2 weeks apart, while staying in their mother's guest room, both of them woke up completely frozen in bed. They both hallucinated this pale woman with sunken eyes and a veil who slithered across the floor and climbed onto their chests, physically compressing their lungs. And get this, they didn't even know about each other's experiences until they casually brought it up at a family barbecue months later. But the horror definitely escalates from there. Nathan's mom eventually moved to a completely new 2-story house. Nathan stays over, and the paralysis strikes again. This time, he's staring at his turned-off TV, but his brain hallucinates that it's acting as a CCTV monitor, showing his mother's new downstairs kitchen. Right there on the screen, he sees the same veiled woman. Then, the TV shuts off, and he suddenly hears real, physical footsteps charging through the downstairs and running up the stairs like an animal on all fours. The woman bursts into his room, looks right at him, and runs away. Nathan finally snaps out of the paralysis, only for his mother to come running into his room wide awake, demanding to know why he was sprinting around the house. She had physically heard the footsteps too. A hallucination somehow made real physical noise? So it's one thing for the mind to project terrors out into the room with you, but how do we cope when our own physical bodies become the trap? It's an entirely different kind of nightmare when your mind is completely lucid, but your physical shell is utterly frozen. Which brings us to case study 3, the trauma of anesthesia awareness. Let's look at the ultimate bodily betrayal through the tragic, real-life story of 73-year-old Sherman Sizemore, who is a former coal miner and Baptist minister. Now, here is the absolute nightmare scenario. This exact sequence of medical errors led to Sherman being fully awake, paralyzed, and feeling 16 agonizing minutes of his own exploratory surgery. Basically, the anesthesiologist gave him the drug that paralyzes the muscles, which includes the vocal cords, but they accidentally failed to administer the actual pain-killing anesthetic. So Sherman counts down from 10, reaches 0, and realizes he's completely conscious. Because his eyes were taped shut, he started frantically flicking his eyeballs back and forth beneath the tape until it loosened just enough for him to see. and he watched and physically felt the surgeon cut into his abdomen with a scalpel, use clamps to hold his skin open, and insert a vacuum to suction his fluids. He felt every single ounce of that pain for 16 whole minutes until a nurse finally noticed his eye flicking. And you might be thinking, okay, well, that's just a freak 1 in a million accident. No way. This terrifying anomaly isn't just a rare nightmare. Anesthesia awareness happens to roughly 20,000 people every single year. It is a highly documented, deeply traumatic medical reality where the brain is wide awake, processing excruciating pain, all while the body is trapped in a chemical prison. When the medical team realized their massive mistake with Sherman, they understandably panicked. They quickly pumped him full of painkillers, but they also gave him a drug called midazolam, which actively induces amnesia. They basically wanted him to forget the trauma. And consciously, the drug worked. Sherman woke up with zero memory of the surgery. Subconsciously, however, his brain remembered every single second of the torture. He developed severe paranoia and massive panic attacks, frequently screaming this heartbreaking plea at his wife, "You can't leave me or they'll kill me." Unable to consciously process the subconscious nightmare his body had just endured, Sherman tragically took his own life just 2 weeks later. All right, on to our final story. Case Study 4, When Reality Attacks Dreams. We're looking at 22-year-old Simone in Germany. She was volunteering as a camp counselor, sleeping outside on a cot in the forest, when her brain was suddenly forced to mask a real-life physical attack. So as she slept, a wild fox wandered into the camp and literally started eating her scalp. But here's the crazy part. Simone's brain didn't wake her up immediately to the danger. Instead, it tried to protect her by translating a horrific, real-life fox attack into a synchronized dream. She dreamed she was staring at this post-apocalyptic skyline, flanked by 2 giant men. The men lifted a crown of thorns and brutally pressed it into her skull. It wasn't until the pain in the dream became so completely blinding that she bolted upright, screaming. She reaches up, feels sticky blood all over her hair, and sees the fox scurrying away into the tree line. That animal had taken 20 solid bites out of her head before her brain finally allowed reality to shatter the dream. So let's recap what we've just looked at. We've seen a man mourn a family that never existed. We've seen siblings somehow share the exact same hallucination. We've seen a man trapped entirely inside his paralyzed physical body, and a woman whose brain tried to politely explain away a wild animal attack as just a bad dream. If your mind can fabricate an entire life from thin air, or trap you inside your own body, how much can you really trust the thing inside your own skull? It's definitely a chilling thought to leave you with. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and we will catch you on the next one.